Greetings and salutations all. In this video, we're going to go ahead and step through how we can actually work with Google Colaboratory, or Google Colab for short. To begin, let's go ahead and sign in to our Google account or our school account. So in my case, I'm going to be using my school account, which is at illinois.edu. If I go ahead and I press next, this is going to transfer us over to the university sign-in page. So I can select my account, and then I just have to enter in my password, which in this case is going to be not telling one. Once we've done that, the next part that we can do is we sort of have this file explorer that immediately pops up. As we've only looked at the home page, we sort of only have Welcome to Google Colab, which is the introductory notebook that you saw before. So let's actually go over to one of our lecture notebooks, and let's scroll down to where you see here, Open in Collab. If you click on this button, you'll be taken into this Google Colab notebook. Inside of this notebook, there's a few things I want to draw your attention to. First, if you go up to where the file name is, 00-collab-overview, and we mouse over the GitHub symbol, you can see that the notebook is stored in GitHub, which means that the notebook right now is going to be a little bit temporary. The other part is, up at the top of each notebook, we try and provide an overview of what the notebook contains. Moreover, going a little bit downwards, we also try and allow for diagnostics to be present. Diagnostics help us understand what kind of computing environment you're using to actually run the notebook. So generally what the version of Python is, what versions of specific data science libraries that might be used inside of the notebook. If there's a GPU, is it on Google Colab, or is it using our local data science environment? Next, we mentioned previously up at the top that the notebook here is being stored on GitHub, which means that it's a temporary copy that we're working with. So what we need to do is we need to obtain a permanent copy of the notebook by saving it onto our Google Drive. To do so, we need to go up to this File menu, then go down to Save a Copy in Drive. If we select this option, what ends up happening is a new tab will open with a copy of the notebook that was just sort of created. So here we can see copy of 00A-Collab overview. The most important part is the fact that the logo changed. So no longer is it a GitHub logo, but now it's a Google Drive logo. So if we start to scroll down ever so slightly back to where we were, again, we can sort of rest easy knowing that we now have a permanent copy of this notebook. So anything that we do inside of the notebook is going to be saved for all of eternity. In the next section, we're going to sort of talk a little bit about the notebook's cells. So a cell here is basically how we can add content. There are either text or code cells. If we want to edit a cell on Google Colab, what we need to do is we need to double click on the cell. So here, I'm just going to double click right in the middle, and notice that we enter into a code cell. If we scroll a little bit down, we can see Markdown is being used to stylize text. So here, the word text is bolded by using 2 stars. We have a link to the different Markdown options that Google Colab offers. To exit out of the cell editor, go ahead and press Escape, and you'll be back in the normal rendered cell view. If we scroll down a little bit more, one part here to note is if you're already familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, Google Colab offers the same shortcut options with the additional requirement that each Jupyter Notebook shortcut is prefixed by either Control if you're on Windows or Command if you're on Mac, M. So this is done to ensure that any shortcut issued on Google Colab doesn't conflict with any web browser shortcut. If we scroll down a little bit further, we get to text cells. So inside of text cells, right, we've seen an example where we are using Markdown to stylize text, but we can also use here LaTeX. So if we wanted to, we could double click into the cell and we could see that, oops, looks like somebody made a boo-boo when it came to specifying an equation. So instead of, c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared, we had c, so we can just change that to 2. Similarly, we can do the same for b squared. Now, you'll notice on the far right-hand side, once we make that update, what happens is we have c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared being displayed right in line with the text. Whereas if we make the same change to where display mode is, you'll notice again, display mode here basically moves the equation to its own separate line, and we sort of get the full featured view of what's going on with the mathematics being displayed. With that being said, let's exit out of the editor view by pressing escape. Let's scroll down a little bit to where we see the Your Turn exercise. And our goal here is to write out our favorite mathematical formula using display mode. From our prior discussion, display mode is using $2 at the start and $2 at the end of the equation. So let's double click into the field that says click me to enter into the editor. Then let's start the display mode part with $2 and end it with $2. And in between the $, we're going to start writing out our favorite equation. In my case, my favorite equation is x equals fraction, the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that's all over 2a. For those who might remember this equation, it is indeed the quadratic formula. And once we're done sort of writing the equation completely, you can see on the far right-hand side, a preview is being displayed. If we press escape to exit out of the code cell, you can see that the exact equation that we typed is just displayed in the code cell's place. Okay, going a little bit more downwards, we're going to change cell types away from a text cell into a code cell. First and foremost, the code cell here is slightly different than a text cell in the fact that we have this play button on the left-hand side, and the background of the cell itself is different. It also has line numbers. Each line number corresponds to a single line of code, as well as syntax highlighting for the Python language. If we go ahead and press the play button, right, what ends up happening is the play button itself is going to cause in the upper right-hand side this entire environment to connect into a remote computer. So we'll be allocated some RAM and some disk space so that we're able to actually run any kind of Python code. If we use Command Enter, that is exactly the same as pressing that play button that we just did. Another part that we can do is we can use Shift Enter to move focus to the next cell. So when we were using Command Enter, we were sort of evaluating the same cell. With Shift Enter, we've evaluated the upper cell and then jumped to the next line. We could also use, in this case, Alt Enter or Option Enter if you're on a Mac to run a cell and then create a new code cell down below. Now, we don't really need a new code cell right now, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the far right-hand side and press the Delete Cell option, or we can use Command MD to delete the code cell. Going even further down, one of the nice features about Google Colab is the fact that we can highlight and execute a specific portion of code. So if we take this code cell right now, you'll see that -10 is appearing. However, that differs from the previous one of 20. So if we run it using just the play button itself, you can see, the two outputs are matching. If we highlight and select a specific portion that we're interested in, we can use the keyboard shortcut Command-Shift-Enter to run just that portion. This shortcut is only going to work on Google Colab. If we scroll down a little bit further, we have an option to create our own code chunk. So why don't we go ahead and create our own code chunk by using the plus code button. And then what we can do is we can actually compute the golden ratio by doing import math. Then we can say the golden ratio is equal to, in this case, 1 plus math dot square root, parentheses 5. And we can then mouse over to the end of the line and then divide by 2. And we can display what the golden ratio is by just typing out the variable name, golden ratio. If we go ahead and press Command-Enter, we can see that the cell executes and we have the desired outcome of 1.618. Next, we can move over to focusing on cursor and movement tricks inside of Google Colab. So these shortcuts allow you to sort of process text in a very powerful and useful way. So here, one of the first things that we can do is we can come up with a continuous multi-cursor. If you're on a Mac, you can do this by holding down Option, Command, and then your down arrow. If you're on a computer or a Windows computer, you can use Alt, Control, down. So if we go ahead and use the shortcut, you can see we now have multiple cursors across each line, and then we can start typing. So we could say hello. And you'll notice that the second we start saying hello, the preview on the right-hand side changes. Moreover, we can mouse backwards and forwards like so, and we can subsequently press Escape to return to just a single line cursor. Okay, so we can also recreate, again, that multi-cursor by holding down the keyboard shortcut, and we can subsequently delete the previous phrase. If we go to the next part, we can come up with basically a controlled multi-cursor. So what this means is we can place multiple cursors not in an exact line. So here we can start a cursor at the first phrase, the end of the second word, and then on the third line we can place the cursor after the phrase word. And then we can again say hello, and we can see the word choice being updated across the stream. And if we add spaces, again, we can modify what's going on in terms of the text. If we go one line down, the last part here is we can select a phrase that appears multiple times, and we can change it across, and we can select all instances and then perform a change across it. So you can think of this more like a find and replace. So if we go Command-Shift-L if you're on a Mac, or Control-Shift-L if you're on Windows, you can see that we've successfully identified the phrase word, and we deleted it, and we can say in its place data scientist. Okay. So that just is a brief wrap up of some really cool cursor and movement tricks that you can potentially use with Colab. Next, let's talk a little bit about evaluation history. So one of the other very useful features of Google Colab is the fact that we can actually see what's happening with respect to the code as it's being run. So here, what we want to do is we want to go to the View menu, then we want to go down to Executed Code History. And as you can see, we had a few different kinds of code cells that were executed. If we go ahead and run the code cell for the graph iteration, right, we can see initially what that cell output looked like down below. We can also see here just a scratch cell that we could potentially use and manipulate. If we go down even further, we can actually make a plot, and we can see what the plot will look like. And then we can change the plot ever so slightly and see again how the plot changed between versions. Okay, The one part here, just to take note, is this execution history is saved on a per session basis, which means that, again, if you close out of the current notebook, you won't have your execution order or anything like that present. So let's go ahead and close the execution tab by pressing on the X. Finally, we do have an optional section that we won't really cover, but it does sort of indicate that we can use other languages inside of a Google Colab notebook like Bash or Shell, R, and SQL to actually write code not inside of Python. If you want, feel free to go and look at all of these different options.